Well, it's so good to welcome all of you, and it's exciting. We're not very far away from the trip. It's coming right up, and it'll be fun. During this time, we'll be looking at all the sites that we will visit, or virtually all of them, the ones that are listed in the brochure. Hello. Hey, welcome. Come on in. And there's only one name tag left. So y'all are going to have to, right here at the shoulder, you can attach one name tag and put both. I think that's right. Is that a blank? Is that an empty sheet? Okay. All right. So there you go. We'll be looking at the sites we'll be visiting, and we will also be looking at the biblical texts that relate to those sites, if there is one. Not all the texts, of course. Not all the sites will have a biblical text related to that. And that'll help us to have some background and have a little jump on things before we go over there. And of course, I encourage you to read all you can before we go as well. The internet is a great resource for learning. Israel has a number of sites that are really helpful. And then, of course, there are a lot of books as well, that can be helpful as well. Wikipedia is quite good. So if you want to look up the sites, Wikipedia, that's helpful as well. So I thought we would begin. I'll begin with a prayer, and then we'll go around the room. Everybody have a chance to introduce yourselves, and then we can get started. Gracious God, we thank you for your gifts. We thank you for this opportunity to go as pilgrims to a land that means so much to so many people throughout the world. We are grateful for the opportunity to share this experience together and open our hearts and minds as we prepare for this important trip. And may it be for each one exactly what he or she needs to nourish mind and spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, and if we can begin, Megan, you want to?
I'm Megan Fahey. I'm not going on the trip. My mom is, so I came here to keep her company tonight.
Wonderful.
Megan is a church member, and I am not. I live in the Hill Country, and my name is Kitty Berger, and my husband was too scared to go, so I found a friend that was ready and willing, and her name is Dr. Becky Reisinger, and she's a doctor in Tyler, and so she's not going to be able to make these meetings, but she's a little bit younger than me, a single gal, and so she and I have never been to Israel, and we live next door to each other from infancy. We grew up together.
Wow.
So this is my lifelong.
In Tyler or?
No, actually Texas City, Texas.
Texas City. Okay.
That's where I'm originally from.
Did you say her name is?
Becky Reisinger.
There's a Carolyn Reisinger on the list here.
That's her name is Carolyn Rebecca Reisinger, but she goes by Becky.
Okay.
She's a pediatrician in Tyler, and she runs the pediatric department for the Catholic hospital there.
Mother Francis. Where one of our daughters was born.
Oh, really? Well, she's in charge of pediatrics there now, so
All
she's
right.
going to go with us. And I'm a retiree, and have my daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren here, and the daughter and grandchildren and son-in-law in San Antonio.
Great. Good. Well, glad you're here. Glad you're here too, Megan. Thanks for coming.
My name is Susan Gerhard, and I'm going to be a retiree in about a month and a week. And so I'm beginning my retirement with a trip to Israel. My husband, he will be here eventually for most of the meetings. He just couldn't make it tonight. But this is a trip that we've planned on and thought about it for a long time. So, and then after Israel, we're going to Arkansas. That's a family trip.
That's great. There are those, I'm not one of them, who also think Arkansas is the Holy Land. My wife Susan's from Arkansas. So.
I'm Frank Tilley. I'm the CFO at All Saints Episcopal School, and I'm looking forward to this trip. My wife and sister-in-law have been the last time the church had this trip, so they told me great things.
And we'll have the same guide.
And we have the same guy. I'm Connie Beck, and I'm a retired banking executive. I've had a fabulous banking career, and I've now been retired a couple of years, and we moved back to Fort Worth. And so I say that I'm on a path of learning, and I choose to learn things that I choose to learn when, where, and how. And I consider this to be an important part of my path of learning, to go back to the Holy Land. As Frank said, Sally and I went in 1999, and it was a magnificent experience. And we've been wanting to go again, and so we're really thrilled that Tim decided to do this. And I told Frank all along, if we ever got to go back, you know, he would obviously just have to go. And so the three of us are going, and we're just looking forward to knowing you all and really learning a great
Great.
deal. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
I'm Sally, pardon me, I'm Sally Sims. I live in Dallas. Although Fort Worth is becoming my second home since I come so often. I'm a retired teacher. I taught 42 years. And when I started teaching children that I'd had their parents in fifth grade, I said, that's enough. So I retired, and I think I'm almost starting my 5th year of retirement. I love it. Have lots of new experiences. I have 3 grown sons and 4 granddaughters. So I stay pretty busy.
You know, Sally's always modest about all the things she's accomplished, but she did retire from public school teaching after 42 years, but she's taught at Richland College for 20 years and still does that. So, you
2
know,
nights a week,
2 nights a week, so.
Not Thursday night, so.
Monday and Wednesday.
Fortunately, you set this on Thursday night so she can be.
That's great.
My name is Lowell Bryan, and my wife and I have been members of the First Methodist Church here for a long, long time, about 40 years or something like that. And we've tried to go to Israel before, and trips have been canceled, so we've never been able to go before. We're hoping that this one does not get canceled for some reason or other. And especially looking forward to having Dr. Brewster lead the trip. We think that'd be very, 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 very interesting and exciting.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Bryan, and we have been a member of First Methodist for many years, member of the loyalty class, and involved in the Texas, in Fort Worth community for several years. We live at the Staten. We're in that retirement mode and have the opportunity to enjoy traveling and just leaving all our cares behind. So I'm looking forward to a great trip. And if any of you all need help packing, that's one of my specialties. I can help you condense everything you need to put into one carry-on suitcase.
That's good. Wow.
My name is, actually Julia Long, is spelled with Y. My mom did that, I don't know why. And I work for US government, I'm not CIA, but I'm consultant, so it's information technology consultant, so I've been traveling quite a bit for my jobs, and been wanting to go to Israel and don't know how, because, you know, I don't never have any opportunity to go there, and I would like to be able to have all this route that we're gonna do, especially with Dr. Brewster's, and I'm really looking forward to it. And out of all those places that I've been, I really want to go to this one, so.
Great. Good. Thank you.
I'm Teresa Cathcart. I'm a school librarian. I've been in education for about 20 years. And I have 3 sons, 2 in Kansas City and 1 in Florida. The one in Kansas City just had a baby. She's almost a year old, and they're expecting their second, so we're getting ready to be our second grandbaby. And then I have 1 son who's in the Air Force who just left for Africa, and he can't really tell us where he goes because he's an intel officer, and if he told us, he would have to kill us. So he could just tell us, I'm going to Africa, Mom. I'm like, okay. No, we're really excited. We've traveled all over the world together. This is my mom, Peggy, and in the summers, I used to go with other teachers and take students on trips all over the world. So I just love traveling. Education gives you that opportunity in the summers.
So what school are you in?
Austin Elementary in Weatherford. We live in
Oh,
Weatherford.
you live in Weatherford. It's nice when you travel for your choice.
That's right.
Oh, it's kind of like me, I have to work for
Yes.
that and then become old.
My name is Peggy Hicks. Teresa is one of our daughters. I have 4 daughters and 1 son. And I'm retired from Bass Enterprises. I'm sure you've heard of the Bass family. I retired one of their executives a few years ago. I have been blessed to travel with Teresa in the school. One of my greatest excitements was Rome and Greece and Turkey. And we were actually in the cave where John got the revelation on Patmos on a Sunday, and the Greek Orthodox Church was having a service there, and that was amazing for me. So it's been quite a blessing, and I'm really looking forward to Israel because of our Lord Jesus Christ walked there. And that's an incredible journey.
It is.
I'm Karen Hunt. I'm a retired teacher from Fort Worth ISD. We have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. I'm also a member. We're also a member of the Loyalty Sunday School class. We know Catherine and Laurel really well. Since we retired, we've traveled quite a bit in Europe and different places. Enjoyed traveling, and on our bucket list was always to go to Israel. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, she told you everything except my name. I'm Bill Hunt. And I'm a retired engineer from Bell Helicopter, and whatever she said goes from me.
Okay.
So what do you want me to tell him not tell?
Oh,
So
all
you'll
the
have
not
to
tell.
figure
Everything but his name.
All the not tell.
All right, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry,
just
sir.
that's exactly right. You can tell it all.
I work for Fort Worth ISD. I'm a campus coordinator for 23 schools, K through 8. We work with gifted and talented, anything advanced, academics, that's what I do for those campuses. And I would like to make this my retirement trip too. I'm tired. Tired of running from school to school. But anyway, we have 3 daughters and 2 grandchildren. We have a new one that's 3 months. Is he 3 months yet?
3.5?
3.5
Yeah.
months. And a almost 4-year-old granddaughter. And we have 3 daughters. And those children are from, our grandchildren are from our oldest. So, and we have a wedding coming up in April. And the other 2 are already married.
Right.
I said it all, so now will you?
You did. I don't need to say. I'm going to say a lot in a minute. So,
I'm Brian Eaton, and let's see, we've been members here about 10 years or so, and you know, Israel's always been something I wanted to see, but the logistics of it has never worked out. And then this year, sort of everything came together, so we're very excited to be able to do well. We're still working on getting it all together, but we have a 16-year-old, so we're kind of getting all of his issues straightened out from being out of town for so long. Let's see, I work as a CPA for an accounting firm here in town, and we have 2 kids.
Our oldest will be 28 next week.
And that's about it.
I'm Felicia Eaton. He didn't tell my name. I've recently gone back to school. I'm actually in nursing school. I'm finishing up my first semester of nursing school. So pretty excited about that. And as soon as we get back from this trip, I start my mental health second summer session. So it's going to be pretty exciting. But we travel a lot. We love to travel. We've done the Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Italy one. Ephesus was phenomenal. Just loved Ephesus. So I'm very excited about this trip. The end.
and Felicia used to be on our staff at one time.
I used to be the assistant director at the mission, which is when I decided nursing school, because I thought, wow, we could really use a nurse that would work with homeless. So
That's great. And you know, the trip that you all have talked about, we have not had a chance to do that one. Would love to do that. Yeah. Greece and Turkey and all that. Well, let's get started. This will be, by the way, this will be our 3rd trip to Israel. We went first in 1994 with Jim Fleming. How many of you heard Jim Fleming when he was here lecture? He's been here a couple of times. He's an archaeologist and the best Bible teacher that I know, and he's just really great. And that was our first trip, and then we went back in 2000 on a very similar trip, and then this one. So we're very much looking forward to this. Looking forward to having the opportunity to get to know all of you better. And you know, on a trip like this, we all will get to know each other very well, and it'll be wonderful. Okay, so let me begin this evening by talking about the land of Israel. And this is kind of to orient all of us to something about the land and kind of how it is. By the way, did everybody get one of these? This tells you what we'll be covering, not necessarily in the order that you see on the list, but we'll just be moving through our itinerary, is what we'll be doing in these classes. So let's do a little overview of the land. The land of Israel is synonymous with Canaan. So when you use those terms in biblical terms, the land of Israel does not mean the modern state of Israel, and we'll compare that in just a little bit. But it is synonymous with Canaan. It's about 50 by 150 miles in dimensions. So if you look at this map, and it's a little hard to read. I wish it were a better. It was a better map, but it's not. Often in the Bible, you will hear the term from Dan to Beersheba, and that encompasses Israel. This is Dan, where you see that arrow at the top, and then down here is Beersheba. And so the Israel, as it is, the land of Israel, encompasses Dan to Beersheba. It goes farther south, the modern state of Israel. We'll look at that in just a minute. Now, we might think that Israel is pretty good size, and this I've laid here side by side a map of Texas and one of Israel as it was in the Kingdom of David. It's that same map we were just looking at. But actually, if you were to take Israel and place it, it would be right there. Just to emphasize that it's about like that, about that shape. And it goes from Oklahoma to about Hillsboro, and then say, Weatherford, not to Mineral Wells, but Weatherford and just the other side of Dallas. It's not a very big area, 50 by 150 miles. And so 95% of the Bible takes place in that area. 95% of it. Only Abraham's beginnings, captivity in Egypt, and Paul's journeys are outside this area. And of course, captivity in Egypt would include also the time in the wilderness, the Sinai Peninsula. And all of Jesus' ministry takes place within that area. There are more than 6,000 archaeological sites in that area. Now think of that. 6,000 archaeological sites in that area. So you could never see them all. It would be virtually impossible. So it is a rich area in history. The modern state of Israel is larger, as I mentioned. This is a map of the modern state. And you can see in the orange, kind of an orangish color, is Israel, and then you can see the West Bank is in gray. So when I don't have a pointer, but if you look up above the West Bank, you go up the body of water. Lake Tiberias, by the way, is also the Sea of Galilee. Those terms are interchangeable. And to the right there, or that is to the east of Lake Tiberias, is the Golan Heights, which is a kind of no man's land in a way. And it was set aside after the war with Syria. So that area, the Golan Heights, another hill country. In fact, the Golan Heights looks a lot like the hill country to me, except the hill country in Texas doesn't have landmines planted all over the place. So you see signs, caution signs about landmines when you're in that area. But tonight we won't be going to that area. We'll be focused in a different place. So to get an idea, the modern state of Israel is about like this. So it goes from the Oklahoma border just above that down just south of Austin. So that tells you kind of, the difference between the original state. So a good way to think, to sort of get into understanding the land is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There are 5 geographical varieties that I want to start out talking about. And the first is geology. There's a great variety of geological formations that you see throughout Israel of all kinds. This is sandstone and granite desert here. It's not a great picture. It's a little bit washed out. And there is an oasis you can see in the center of the picture there. But sandstone and granite. This is alluvial soil and a very old volcano, of course no longer active and very much worn down. So you see lots of interesting geological features. The longest fault in the world is the Syrian-African fault. Also, down in Africa particularly, it's known as the Rift Valley. So it's a very long fault line. I have circled it here just to, I don't know why that little window is there. Okay, it's gone. I have circled that, and so you can see. It's a little difficult to see, but at the very top of that circle, you can sort of make out the Sea of Galilee, and then the Dead Sea is that next body of water that you see, and that valley runs all the way down Israel. It's also known through Israel as the Jordan Valley. This is the view. This is a relief map, so this isn't actually the view. But this relief map shows you what Moses' view of the land of milk and honey would have been from Mount Nebo. So you can see, I put this up here so you can see that is in the lower left corner the Dead Sea, and then you can see the Jordan River flowing down into the Dead Sea through this great fault. So there's geology, there's also elevation. In this 150 long by 50 mile wide area, you go from Mount Hermon in the far north, which is 9,000 feet. This is a picture of Mount Hermon, very beautiful, snow-covered mountain. This is taken in the springtime. The snows are still very much there, and the wildflowers in the foreground. And you go all the way down to the Dead Sea. So you go from, in that space of 150 miles, you go from 9,000 feet above sea level to 1,300 feet below sea level at the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, the shore of the Dead Sea is the lowest place in the world where you can walk and breathe air, So it's remarkable in that very small country that you have this sort of variety of elevation. Geology, elevation, and then there's climate. This map shows you rainy and dry quarters. And so to the north and to the west is the heavier rainfall area, and to the east and to the south is the lower rainfall area. So you have these rainy quarters and these dry areas. This is another way of looking at that. You can see the heavy rainfall, 60 inches annual rainfall in the north. There are places down near the Dead Sea where they get one rainfall every 5 years on average. So again, this huge, variety. And this is a picture of a storm front moving in. This is up in the northern part, and you can just see how lush this is. These are springs near Tel Dan in the far north. Remember Dan to Beersheba? And then this is a waterfall at one of the sources of the Jordan River in the far north. These are, you can see the vegetation around there. You can see the wildflowers. You can see Mount Tabor. Again, this is up in the north. and you can see these lush fields and all this. Very different. And then, but you go east of Jerusalem and you're in the Judean wilderness, which is a dry, desolate, chalk desert, basically. And a lot happens in the wilderness. When you talk about Jesus going into the wilderness, this is where he was headed. And this is an area of very unpredictable rainfall at best. So then you have vegetation. Even in the Judean wilderness, there's vegetation on the north, especially after the rainy season, whatever rain they get. So they graze sheep in the Judean wilderness. We'll see that in just a moment. There are large trees around, often in a former forest that had been clear cut at some point along the way. Just an interesting little side note. This is manna after a Sinai sandstorm. This is a plant that produces, after a sandstorm, it's scratched by the sand. It produces these little puffs of kind of a sweet, honey-sweet material, and so it's called manna. Actually, the word manna means in Hebrew, what is it? And of course, you remember the story as they're wandering in the wilderness. They don't know what this stuff is that feeds them in the wilderness, and this is the plant that generally is supposed to be the source of that. Of course, the amazing thing about the journey in the wilderness for them was that there was a lot of it, Grapes at the end of summer. There are a lot of grapes grown in Israel. Wildflowers in the spring. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. Olive trees. Olive trees figure prominently in the Bible. Olive trees are considered to be the most beautiful tree. Now look at that. Does that tree look beautiful? One of the things we will see is that the way something is described in the Semitic mindset in antiquity has nothing much to do with what it looks like, but how it functions. And so a rock is beautiful because it's strong, it's eternal, it's eternal, it's steady. So you will notice, have you seen Schindler's List? Okay, at the end of Schindler's List, what do they put on the tomb of Oskar Schindler? Rocks. Because that it's not what they look like, it's what they mean. And the olive tree is a tree that is very hardy. It has amazing disease resistance. That's why they live to be so old. This is a very ancient olive tree in the picture. They also provide oil. They provide fruit to eat. They're beautiful because they function. They provide wood, and you'll see a lot of olive wood items for sale there that are carved out of olive wood. So vegetation and then animals. These are sheep grazing in a dry field. The shepherds care for the sheep. They take them from place to place to graze, helping them to find the good pasture. And of course, there's a rich imagery throughout Scripture of shepherds and sheep. This is a goat herd in a desert canyon. And this is an ibex, wild goat. These things are not afraid of heights, as you can see. They're really amazing. And often it's the ibex horn that is used for the shofar. And generally, when you see the word trumpet in Scripture, it's the shofar that they are referring to. And so that comes generally from the ibex. Migratory birds. I don't remember the statistic. I meant to write it down, but I believe it's 250 that you can see in one day. If you are a bird watcher, you can see as many as 250 different species of birds flying through Israel. It is a major migratory path. Okay, that was 5. Now we go to 4. 4 seas in or at the border of Israel with 4 different salinities. The Mediterranean Sea, just like the ocean, 3.5%. The Red Sea is saltier, 4.2%. The Dead Sea, 32% salt. The Great Salt Lake is 11%, if that gives you an idea of how salty the Dead Sea is. And then there is the Sea of Galilee, which is a freshwater lake with 23 different edible fish in that sea. So it's a very, again, a very rich environment. So this is the Mediterranean Sea. We'll see this place in a moment. This is Caesarea by the Sea, we'll talk about Caesarea by the Sea in a minute. Regular ocean salinity there. The Red Sea down to the south where the tip of Israel touches it, 4.2% salinity. And then the Dead Sea, 32% salinity. I love the warning sign. The funny thing is the warning sign looks as though you could drown in the Dead Sea. It would be very difficult to do. Because here's a picture, by the way, these three young ladies in the foreground are our daughters. And you can see how this is our group, and I don't know, that may be me leaning over there, I'm not sure. But you can see that our group is basically floating on top of the water. Here's a guy, found this picture online, you know, he's reading newspaper and just floating because you cannot sink when it's 32% salinity. Oh yeah. Yeah, the warning is, you know, that kind of salinity, you do not want to get water in your eyes, for sure. Oh, I'm sure, yeah. Sure. This is, these are pillars of salt in the Dead Sea. And it is amazing. I mean, the water, sorry?
Would you be able to see that one?
Yes, you can see, yeah, sure. You can see these kind of salt formations around the edge. And it is, the Dead Sea is losing water. It's losing, there's a concern about that. They're trying to figure out how to save the Dead Sea. It's getting smaller and smaller. But it is a fascinating place, and there are salt formations everywhere. On our first trip, we actually went. There's just a salt mountain basically beside the Dead Sea, and then we went in a salt cave, a cave that had naturally been worn, and we the cave was actually closed, but we went in anyway with this. With our guide who lives there, and we had to crawl on our belly through this stuff. It was a little bit nerve-wracking. And so we got to the end, though, and we were rewarded by this room that looked like a cathedral of salt. And at the top, there was an opening. That's where the water would flow through. And because of that, the sun was shining, and those walls were like glass. It was beautiful. And but anyway, the Dead Sea is a fascinating place. There's no place like it on earth. I don't know if one of these pillars is Lot's wife or not, but you know. Okay. So anyway, the Sea of Galilee is fresh water. It's very beautiful, and it is there is a commercial fishing operation to this day. And of course, the disciples, some of the disciples of Jesus were fishermen. And this is a fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee, as it would be done today. That is a huge net that is cast. There is a sense in which you can look at this and say, you know, in a way they do fishing about the same way they did 2,000 years ago. It's just with motorized boat and a much larger net, but still this, you know, casting of a net, fishing in that way. Okay, 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Also, I mean, you know, again, Israel's such an interesting place that 3 continents really come together there. This is a map that shows you that. You can see Africa and to the lower left. You can see Europe then up to the upper left, and to the right then you see Asia. And this really becomes important in understanding the history of the land because it is at that place where these continents really come together that it is constantly being crossed by armies. who are fighting, and they're fighting over trade routes and the trade, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. In fact, right there is the Via Maris, the way of the sea. And when the scripture says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. It is speaking of this way of the sea. It's a difficult place to live because the armies march up and down through there. It gets conquered by one, conquered by another, taken by one, taken back by the other throughout history. And you can see that Megiddo is on the way of the sea, the Via Maris there. And Megiddo becomes a place that becomes known for battles. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But it is because, there's Europe and there's Africa and there's Asia and these trade routes go through there that it is disputed land constantly. There are two deserts, the Sahara to the south, the Arabian Desert to the east. And so you can see this silent and lonely desert expanse. The people, the lifestyle in the Bible, in the Old Testament, up until the time when settlements began to happen, and after that time, of course, up until the very present moment, there are Bedouins who still, this is a modern Bedouin tent. And the semi-nomadic lifestyle is exhausting, certainly in biblical times. You can imagine how exhausting it was. Today, some of these tents are quite, some of them, have, electric generators and stuff. TVs, yeah. But certainly not in biblical times. So then there is the final and most important one, and that is God. The three great monotheistic religions of the world came from this little land on the edge of silence and loneliness. And the great rivers, the Nile, the Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent, all that, did not produce any lasting religions. They were kind of passing fads in a way. But this largely desolate, lonely region produced the three enduring monotheistic, that is, religions with one God, that exist to this day. They came out of loneliness, they came out of desert, they came out of a difficult life in which they had to always struggle. They didn't come out of the place of abundance and the place of fertility, but at the place of scarcity and difficulty. So think about that, and we can ponder why that might be the case. So let's talk now about historical periods in Israel, and I'm setting all this up so that you have some sense of the land, but also throughout our tour, our guide will be talking about periods of history. This dates to the such and such period. This dates to the such and such period. So I want to just go through that a little bit. You have the age of the patriarchs, 17th century BCE, which is a common way in scholarly terms. Generally, things are dated these days. Before the Common Era, it means, and CE is the Common Era. It's the same as BC and AD. But 17th century, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And then 13th century, Moses. 13th through the 12th centuries, the Israelites are settling the land of Israel. Canaan, remember, is synonymous. And then the united monarchy, the kings Saul, David, and Solomon, are in this period, 1020 to 930 BC. And then you have the divided kingdom. Judah and Israel are divided. Judah in the south, Israel in the north. Israel is crushed by the Assyrians. 10 tribes are exiled. This is in 722, 720. And then in 586, Judah is conquered by the Babylonians, and this is the beginning of the Babylonian exile. Jerusalem and the first temple, Solomon's temple, are destroyed in 586 BC, and most of the Jews are exiled. So then we begin to name these periods by who's in charge in the land. And there are a lot of them because, remember, this is a land that is conquered by one people and conquered by another and conquered by another. So the Persian period is 536 to 332. The Hellenistic period, 332 to 166, also known as the Greek period. The Maccabean revolt is in 166, 163, and begins the Hasmonean period. So Maccabean, Hasmonean, they're synonymous. And then the Roman period begins then in 63 and goes through 313. And of course, it is in this period that much of what we see, we will be looking at this period, the Roman period, because of course that's the time in which Jesus lived, and the early disciples and the early church. And then the Byzantine period followed that, 313 to 636. Then the Arab period, 636 to 1099. And then the Crusader period, 1099 to 1291. Then the Mamluk period, 1291 to 1516. Then the Ottoman period, or that's the Ottoman Turks. This is 1517 to 1917. And then British rule from 1918 to 1948. And then, of course, the modern state of Israel comes into existence in 1948. So that's, you'll be tested on this at the end of the class. But there are a lot of periods of history, as you can see. And, in Israel, when you go down, you go earlier. And so these ancient cities have layer upon layer upon layer. And we will see that, certainly we will see that dramatically at Megiddo, which is a very ancient city. But first we go to Caesarea. Caesarea, there are two Caesareas that you read about in the Bible. One is simply referred to as Caesarea in the Bible. This is Caesarea by the sea. The other one is Caesarea Philippi. We will visit both Caesareas. But we will first visit Caesarea by the sea. This is how it looks today, Caesarea by the sea. These are the excavated ruins, and it's on the Mediterranean Sea. And you can see on this chart this will give you an idea of what we will see. A lot of the old city of Caesarea, that is the old harbor, is underwater now. The water level is different. And so what you see in the sort of grayish, greenish color is underwater. And then what you see in the orange is above water today. And you can see there are Crusader period fortifications, and we will look at some of those eras, some of those periods today. This is kind of a fisheye lens look, a wide-angle lens look of Caesarea by the sea. This is a restored amphitheater. They have productions there, plays, concerts, and so forth. But the basic structure that this restoration was, on which this restoration was done, is the Roman amphitheater. Caesarea was built for the Olympic Games originally let's see, what year? Between 22 and 9 BC. Caesarea was built, and of course built by the Romans. This is how it looks. You can see, if you look at this and think of the things that we will see in any Roman city, In the upper right-hand side, you see the amphitheater. And then in the middle on the left-hand side, do you see that that's a racetrack? That's the hippodrome, or horse racing arena. And then there is in the foreground the harbor. So those are features that maybe not the harbor, it depends on where the city is located, but you will see in most Roman cities a hippodrome and an amphitheater. By the way, I mean, just the amphitheater as it was back then was capable of being flooded, and they would have actually battleships battle each other to the death. And as you know, the Roman games were very cruel, and people fought to the death. But they actually would flood the thing with water and would have battleships where they would fight to the death for entertainment. This is a chart that shows you, you can see on here things like the temple site, the inner harbor, the ruins underwater that we talked about earlier. You can see the theater. The palace is out on that point, the hippodrome. So those are, it's a fascinating place, partly because you can see several periods. This is the Roman period aqueduct. The Romans were amazing engineers, and they carried water for miles and miles and miles. I don't have an aerial shot of this aqueduct, but what still exists above, that is now above ground, it's been excavated, is very long. I don't know, it may be 2 miles long, as I recall. A lot of these structures, though, were taken apart, stones used for building, you know, through the centuries. And so the ones that were above ground didn't survive. The ones that got covered up with sand and ended up underground are the ones that were excavated and survived for the most part. So that's Roman period. You can see that at Caesarea. You can see the Byzantine period. This is a Byzantine period mosaic. There are beautiful mosaics everywhere. Susan loves mosaics, and she's anxious to see more of them. And actually, Susan said, you know, if I see one more mosaic, but they are really beautiful, and we will see some stunningly beautiful mosaics when we are there. This is Byzantine period, and then let's see, what happened to my, that's too bad. I thought I had a picture of the, let me look. No, somehow I didn't make it in here. You can also see you can see the Roman period and the Byzantine period and the Crusader period here. And you saw on the map earlier the Crusader fortification. That is an amazing structure because the arches, the stone arches and the intricate work from the Crusader period is magnificent. You'll just have to imagine it and take my word for it. I somehow didn't make it in here. Let's talk about the biblical text for Caesarea by the Sea. And the first one really is just a mention of it. So we won't turn to this one. That is Acts 8:40. Philip goes from Jerusalem to, ultimately ends up in Caesarea to evangelize it. And that's just mentioned, you know, almost in passing in Acts 8:40. This is right after Philip baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8. But he does go to Caesarea. So he is the first one that the book of Acts mentions in the early church going to Caesarea. The more critically important event that takes place there is Simon Peter. In the 10th chapter of Acts. Oh, that's okay. Dun, 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 dun. So Acts 10, I don't know if somebody would volunteer to read for us. Anybody have a Bible? Okay. Peggy, if you would, start with the 10th verse of Acts 10.
Spirit, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I said the 10th verse. Let's start at the, I led you astray. Start at the first verse of chapter 10.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. The angel answered, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa and bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had gone, Cornelius called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier who was one of his attendants. He told them everything that had happened and sent him to Joppa. How far do you want me to go?
Let's stop there for just a moment. Let me just point something out. Simon Peter is staying in Joppa with a man named Simon also, who is a tanner. And so what's interesting about that, the profession of tanner was unclean. It was an unclean profession. Now, Simon was certainly a Jew, and somebody's got to do it, but it is an unclean profession, meaning that it's not kosher. So Simon is rendered unclean because of his profession and would have to go through, a cleansing process to be made clean. And so what's interesting, though, is that Simon Peter stays with him. It mentions that he's a tanner, I think, because Simon is beginning to have a conversion experience himself. Simon, and by that I don't mean becoming a follower of Jesus. He's already that, of course. But he is beginning to change the way he views people. So, yeah, if somebody else wants to read and is ready to do it,
Sure. I'll read
yeah,
it.
go ahead. Yeah, Connie, start at verse 9, please.
At verse 9,
Mm-hmm.
okay. About noon the next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while it was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw the heaven open, and something like a large sheet coming down, being lowered to the ground by its 4 corners. In it were all kinds of 4-footed creatures and reptiles and birds of the air. Then he heard a voice saying, Get up, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is profane or unclean. The voice said to him again, a second time, What God has made clean, you must not call profane. This happened 3 times, and the thing was suddenly taken up to heaven. Now while Peter was greatly puzzled about what to make of the vision that he had seen, suddenly the men sent by Cornelius appeared. They were asking for Simon's house and were standing by the gate. They called out to ask whether Simon, who was called Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, Look, 3 men are searching for you. Now get up, go down, and go with them without hesitation, for I have sent them. So Peter went down to the men and said, I am the one you are looking for. What is the reason for your coming? They answered, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright and God-fearing man who is well spoken by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and hear what you have to say. So Peter invited them in and gave them lodging. The next day he got up and went with them, and some of the believers from Joppa accompanied him. The following day they came to
Caesarea.
Caesarea.
Mhm.
Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. On Peter's arrival, Cornelius met him and falling at his feet, worshipped him. But Peter made him get up, saying, "Stand up, I am only a mortal." And as he talked with him, he went in and found that many had assembled. And he said to them, "You yourselves know that it is unlawful for a Jew to associate with or to visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone profane or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. Now may I ask why you sent for me?" Cornelius replied, 4 days ago at this very hour at 3 o'clock, I was praying in my house when suddenly a man in dazzling clothes stood before me. He said, "Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your alms have been remembered before God. Send therefore to Joppa and ask for Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying in the home of Simon, a tanner by the sea." Therefore I sent for you immediately, and you have been kind enough to come. So now all of us are here in the presence of God. We'll listen to all the Lord has commanded you to say.
Okay, thank you. We'll stop right there. So you can see what has happened to Simon Peter. He has this very strange experience. He's on the rooftop praying. He has this vision, a sheet, something like a sheet, it says, comes down, full of all these reptiles and things that you cannot eat. They're forbidden in the law. They're unclean. They're not kosher. And yet this voice says, "Get up, Peter, and kill and eat." And he says, "By no means," in the translation you have, absolutely not in the English, Common English version. You might say, "No way." I mean, it's a strong, there is no way I'm going to do that, he says, because I've never eaten anything unclean. And what the Lord has made clean, you are not to call unclean. And so he's still not, even after, this is the interesting thing, even after Simon Peter has spent all this time with Jesus, even after Jesus has loaded the disciples into the boat and gone over on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, that's where the Gentiles are, that's where they herd swine, for goodness sake, that's where they encounter this, this herd of pigs over there. That's an unclean area. Jesus took them over there all the time. And even after they had seen Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman by the well, over all that Jesus had said, Simon still has not gotten the message that there's no such thing as this category of people who are clean and people who are unclean. Now, it's very unlikely that Simon changed his dietary habits, because the point was not, okay, Simon, you can start eating reptiles or something now. Or you can have a ham sandwich. But the point is that you are not to categorize people in the way you categorize animals, as clean and unclean. And so the Gentiles that you won't even associate with are God's children too, and that the covenant is for them also. And so then he goes to Cornelius' house. It dawns on him what all this is about. He finally gets the message. And then he shares with them, and we won't read it because it's a long passage, but he shares with them the whole gospel story that happens often in Acts, where it's sort of laid out like that. And then Cornelius and his whole household are baptized. And so this is a really significant thing that happens at Caesarea by the Sea, because Cornelius is the first Gentile convert. And that's a big deal. And of course, Paul really gets the message. Paul becomes the apostle to the Gentiles, and sees as his ministry proclaiming the good news to the Gentiles everywhere. And then there are other places. So that's important. That's the most important thing in Scripture that happens at Caesarea. Paul passes through several times, so you can see in Acts 9 and 18 and 21, Paul, going hither and yon to do his missionary work, passes through Caesarea. Then Paul is imprisoned there for 2 years in Caesarea by the sea before being sent to Rome for trial. So it is an important place, and it figures in the book of Acts. Now, Jesus never goes to Caesarea, as far as we know, and almost certainly he didn't. It is a Roman city, and it is a place that probably Simon Peter had never been to Caesarea. By the way, Simon had to walk about a day and a half from Joppa to Caesarea by the sea to get there to meet Cornelius. And there just wasn't a lot of mixing in that sense. Jews did not go into these Roman cities by and large, unless they absolutely had to. But as I mentioned, we will, as we go along, we think about the area across the Sea of Galilee. Jesus did take the disciples over there quite a bit. That region is known as, by the way, as the Decapolis, 10 cities, and they're all Hellenistic cities. They are they're Gentile cities. The 10 cities, Decapolis means 10 cities. So the 10 cities over there on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, we'll go to Megiddo, and this is an image of the plain of Megiddo. Any questions about Caesarea? I guess I should ask that before. Any comments? Okay, this is the plain of Megiddo, and it's a large flat plain, and if you can picture that map, let me go to this map real quick. You can see this plain, also called the plain of Jezreel, is the Via Maris you see over on the left. You can barely see the words down in the lower left-hand corner. That's the way of the sea. Goes through here. And you can see that Megiddo really is at the crossroads. So when you're looking at places where there's likely to be armies cross, it's kind of like Poland. You know what I mean? In history, where it just gets conquered and run over like that. So this is Tel Megiddo. A tel, by the way, simply means a hill. It refers generally to an archaeological site. And Megiddo is a very old city. This is a chart that shows periods that go back earlier, so earlier I showed you a chart that kind of showed those periods in terms of what was going on and who was who. Generally in archaeology, these periods are called Neolithic, Early Bronze 1, Early Bronze 2, Early Bronze 3, Intermediate Bronze, Middle Bronze 2, Late Bronze 1, Late Bronze 2, 3, Iron 1, Iron 2. So these are the ages generally in archaeological terms. Megiddo goes all the way back at least to Early Bronze 1. Before that, because by that time it is a large city already. And you can see over on the right-hand side, this kind of shows what they found in these various strata. And they have numbered the strata. So it's instructive to learn to look at this and kind of keep in mind the work of the archaeologist going deeper and deeper, meaning going backward in time. So if you look at the bottom, Babylonian Persian period is strata 1, and then strata 2, 3, and it goes all the way back then to 20. There are different things going on in these strata. And you can see that over on the far right, Assyrian rule, you go back, Israelite, a later Israelite city, going back an earlier Israelite city, and then a late Canaanite city, and then Egypt's in charge for a while, and then it goes on back to pre-Egypt, and the settlements there, they found things like tombs and temples and so forth. So we'll be able to see that because what's interesting at Megiddo, there are you go down in these tunnels and you can see all of these strata, and it's a large archaeological site. So Megiddo is mentioned in the Bible. in the book of First Kings, it's mentioned that it was included, just in mention, in the 5th Administrative District of Solomon. The residence of the district governor apparently was there. In fact, the word Megiddo means something like residence of the tell of the governor is what it, a tell Megiddo means the tell of the governor. Megiddo is a word that means governor. So this is a site of the district governor. Megiddo is mentioned with Jerusalem, Hazor, Gezer as a central city built by Solomon. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, was probably killed in that city when he fled from Jezreel, which is nearby, during Jehu's revolt. That's mentioned also. So Megiddo's mentioned there. Then there is a campaign mentioned. Again, this is a place overrun by campaigns pretty regularly in history. And you can find mention of that in 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles. And there's a list of conquered cities on the walls of the temple in Karnak in Egypt. Megiddo is mentioned as a conquered city in that. So let's talk about Megiddo, because often people talk about Megiddo as Armageddon. And so I want to talk just a little bit about that, because the most misunderstood and confounding book in the Bible is Revelation. And you can. There are all sorts of books that talk about all sorts of different things about the book of Revelation. And really, if you drill into the and try to determine how would the people at the end of the first century understand all of that bizarre imagery, and I don't have time to go into that. I love to teach the book of Revelation because I think it's very instructive. But in understanding, what was going on in that time, and how it is a message of hope, as bizarre as it seems to be. The number 666 is one of those things that's just been magnified way out of proportion. And we really don't have time to go into that, but it really makes sense. It's almost certainly refers to Nero, and there are reasons for that. But Armageddon is another one of those words. And strangely enough, no one really knows for sure what the name Armageddon means. First of all, we don't know how to spell it. So if you look at all the Greek manuscripts that include that word, which is found in one verse in the book of Revelation, you can see Harmageddon, Armageddon spelled in those 3 different ways. And we don't know what place it refers to, but most suppose it does refer to Megiddo, and that is, what we've been talking about on that plain, the plain of Esdraelon, or the plain of Jezreel, or the plain of Megiddo. Because it's been a scene of frequent battles, it appears in the book of Revelation that it symbolizes that final great conflict between the forces of good and the forces of evil, in which evil will be defeated. Not by armaments, but by God's incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. And so you will sometimes have people say, well, Megiddo is where the final battle is going to take place. Not really, I believe. Misunderstands the whole point of the book of Revelation, which is full of imagery and symbols. Megiddo, or Armageddon, is a symbol for that final battle in which good will win out. And so the book of Revelation is a book of hope. And so perhaps Armageddon refers to Megiddo, but we really don't know for sure. But I think it's worth mentioning that, because I think even in our flyer for the trip, it says something about Revelation says it's where the final battle will be fought. And it says Armageddon, and perhaps it means Megiddo. And it makes sense that would be a symbol for that, because as I tried to lay out in talking about it, it is a place that has often been conquered and reconquered. So that's Megiddo. I want to move very quickly, because I want to be sure that we're out always earlier than 8 o'clock, for sure, but no later than. positively for sure. Mount Carmel is the next place that we will visit on our tour. And this is the last place we'll talk about tonight. You can see on this map, Mount Carmel is by the Mediterranean Sea, just up off the sea there, and is circled on the map. This is a picture of Mount Carmel. It is a beautiful area. This is the Valley of Jezreel, the valley we've been talking about, and that is the view from Mount Carmel. So looking down on the valley, that's what you see. And so here, let's talk a little bit about where we find it in the Bible. Because it is a beautiful place, Carmel, which means vineyard or garden land or fruitful, is used as a metaphor for beauty and fertility in the Bible. And there are some passages there that I have I've put. Song is abbreviation for Song of Solomon, a poetic, a love poem, and it uses Mount Carmel as an image for beauty and for fertility. And 2 Kings, Isaiah, and a couple of places use it the same way. But during drought, it is a metaphor for desolation, because that beauty is turned into dry desolation. And so it is used in that way also in the book of Isaiah as well. Mount Carmel is best known as the meeting place between Elijah and the prophets of Baal and Asherah. That's 1 Kings 18, 19 through 40. And later it is a sanctuary for Elisha, who is Elijah's successor. These are both prophets, of course, in the Old Testament. And so I want to read that passage of from 1 Kings, if somebody will turn to that. Any volunteers?
First Kings 8, chapter 18, 19 through 40.
Yeah. Please.
Now summon the from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let them choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God." Then all of the people said, "What you say is good." Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal. I think I've said that 3 different ways, sorry. From morning till noon, "O Baal, who answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears. as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it, large enough to hold two, how do you pronounce it? Shays of seeds. He arranged the wood.
My translation just says measures.
Okay.
Seah is
Seahs.
S-E-A-H.
Okay, shares of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill your large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a third time," he ordered, and they did it a third time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water from the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Then Elijah commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down into the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there.
Okay. Not the most uplifting ending to that story, certainly for the prophets of Baal. But this is an important story in the Hebrew Scriptures, because one of the major things with which Israel, the people of God, were always contending was idolatry, and that goes throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. And this is this big contest between this prophet of God and all these other prophets. And Mount Carmel is the site of that. Up on the mountain there is this statue. That's Elijah with the sword. Elijah is nicknamed also the fiery prophet for good reason. Mount Carmel also is the site where his successor, Elisha, went for a kind of a getaway place, a place of respite. And so I want to read. I'll just go ahead and read this one. It's one of my favorite passages in the Hebrew Scriptures about Elisha the prophet. Elisha went up. This is 2 Kings 2, 23 to 25. And it's in that last verse that it mentions Mount Carmel. And this is an important lesson I want you all to hear very carefully. Elisha went up from there to Bethel. As he was going up the road, some young people came out of the city, and they mocked him. "Get going, Baldy! Get going, Baldy!" Turning around, Elisha looked at them and cursed them in the Lord's name. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mangled 42 of the youths. From there, Elisha went to Mount Carmel and then back to Samaria. So the moral of that story is, don't make fun of bald-headed preachers. Okay, so that's it for this evening. Any questions or comments that you all have? Okay, so if you think of any and you want to email me, that would be great. The directions on how to access the video will come by email, and they'll go out to everyone so that those who aren't able to be here will be able to access the video and watch that. Okay, look forward to the rest of our time together. By the way, our last session will be just before, it'll be the Thursday evening before we leave. You probably remember that from my email. And that will be just a time to share packing tips from Catherine, we now know. And also a time to just, kind of make sure, we answer everybody's questions. One of the things that I'm going to check on, I don't know if it will be possible or not, but if we can Skype with Bev Robb, that would be pretty cool to be able to ask her any questions that you all have to ask her. If not Bev, maybe somebody related to her. It would really be cool if we could Skype with Mishi, but I don't know what time it would be in Israel at that point. But Mishi will be our guide over there. And how many of you came to that meeting and got to meet him? Yeah, a number of you. We had that sort of initial meeting, and he was here. And he's a really gregarious, fun guy, and he's been doing this a very long time, very experienced, and we will enjoy him a great deal. Okay. Thank you all so much. See you next week.